So I fell off Kaisen, and I feel kind of bad about it because it has been nothing but brilliant. Ever since the Culling Games was introduced, I've always really enjoyed it. A lot of you know I've publicly defended it. I think it's a brilliant experience through and through, and now it's evolving even further. It's retroactively changing the story that came prior, giving a lot more perspective, and pushing it into a whole new realm. When I say that I fell off, I think I just got burnt out. I think I found myself indulging within Kaisen so much every single week and prioritizing how emotionally fulfilling it would be that it became a little bit too much, that I felt like I was relying on it a little bit too much. So I found myself in this weird position where I enjoyed reading it, but I wanted to give it a break. I wanted to let it simmer and build and gain over time so I could come back and digest it all over again. And the break felt purposeful. It felt like I was giving myself a good room to breathe away from all of this great content so I could come back and I guess give it the value and respect that it deserves, because I found myself lacking within that department. I took a couple of months off and I have come back to some of the best, some of the most creative, some of the most exciting times for the Kaisen community, for the story, for its characters, and mostly for shaping the finale of this story. For a long time, the Culling Games has been looked at through a lot of different lenses, and a massive portion of that lens has been pretty negative. A lot of people have not liked this arc, and that's perfectly fine. It's not going to be for everyone, but I think a reason for that dislike is because the first half of the Culling Games has been pure setup. It's been pushing characters purposefully forward, allowing them to evolve and grow, and while fights are very much entertaining and the development within those fights is entertaining, there wasn't much of a narrative hook or lure to continue past those fights. What I mean by this is that the Culling Games has been built off that one-to-one interaction, jumping from this character fighting to that character fighting, with a very loose knowledge of what the end goal of the Culling Games is. And I've specifically talked about this before and how this is both a good thing and a bad thing. It's not a fault of Akatami, it's just how he's approaching this arc and the mystery that unravels within it. See, we know somewhat of what the purpose of the Culling Games is, yet the murkiness or the questions within that answer is way too far and few between. See, the result for what the Culling Games could do is so up in the air that it could be anything. We know Kenjaku wants to create a merger, but we haven't really been hinted to the overall effect. We know there's also ulterior motives when it comes to Sukuna, and that's finally coming out to play. But you might see the problem. Having these characters grow exponentially to the result of what the Culling Games is trying to do, but actually not knowing that result, causes a bit of conflict within yourself, maybe even a bit of confusion. It's one thing to really enjoy these fights. It's one thing to enjoy the next fight and the fight after that, and how brilliant Akatami balances the exposure of these fights, the levels. They're not all high octane extravaganza that is showing anything and everything. They're very specific, they're detailed in their approach, and they're tailored to raise your expectation over time. It's a big reason why I compare it a lot to Shibuya, not because the arcs are massive in scale, but more so the structure is actually pretty similar. They're just designed a bit differently. If you ever were to go back and reread the Culling Games, you'll notice that the scale starts very low, and very quickly it ramps up over time, both with abilities and fighting and the scope of what is going on, all the way to where we are now. This is the transition point for the Culling Games. And if you're able to get through that first segment of raising your expectation, of evolving these characters because it was much needed, even without the overall lure of the Culling Games, not really knowing where the ending is or what's going to happen or what the quote-unquote true purpose of the games is, you get to this point now and are surprised. You are shocked. You are excited to finally get some concrete narrative development that will reshape your perception of the first half of the Culling Games, what the purpose of growing all of these characters was for. Obviously, none of us could have known this, but just going back and looking at Shibuya with the nuggets of narrative twists and revelations that Shibuya holds, it should have been probably expected a little bit more. We just didn't know when. So what are those big narrative twists that is going to reel everyone back into the story, even people that were confused, even people that didn't like the Culling Games? What is the big explosion? Well, there's a couple. Firstly, we have a much clearer picture for Kenjaku, his motives, his abilities, what he's trying to do, and the actual visual effect of this taking place. Firstly, knowing how strong Kenjaku is was probably the most vital piece of the puzzle that we needed. We knew he was scary, we knew he was powerful, but we needed to see that. If all of our main cast of characters is growing, we need to see it from him as well. And we get the perfect showcase for that with Chozo, Tengen, and Yuki. Arguably, this is probably the easiest thing for Akatami to handle because Yuki could have done anything. We knew nothing about about her. We knew nothing about her ability, so all Akutami had to do was to make her really powerful, and that's exactly what he done. So you have a very incredible fight that is also very emotional for Chozo into raising his development further and utilizing him more most likely within the future because he's still alive. It's also very emotional with the sacrifice of Yuki, someone that was just introduced, someone that just got revealed to her powers, who is very strong, and she gets killed off. But I think this is utilized as a great consequence for showing off Kenjaku for the first time. Let me put it like this just to simplify it. If we've seen how powerful Kenjaku was, but he didn't kill anybody, he didn't horrifically injure anybody, there's a sense of disbelief that he isn't as powerful as he seems. You're going to look at him as a little bit of a fraud, and there's a lot of ways to detour that so it's not as obvious, but the consequence here is that Yuki was very powerful and that she couldn't stop Kenjaku. But now in our minds we can finalize that Kenjaku is that guy and he should not be messed with whatsoever on a power front. This is the start of the downfall, because this is the one thing that they needed to secure and they couldn't do it, and it came at a great loss. Off the back of this, you get the more military political perspective with what Kenjaku's trying to do, and you see this visually, which I think is very powerful, with foreign military invading Japan, which is fueling the Culling Games retroactively. These people that don't believe in cursed energy, know nothing about it, now suddenly entering and trying to understand it further. It spreads fear, it spreads malice, and it's just another thing to add to the Culling Games' massive boiling point. It's like a primary explosion that triggers other explosions. The second is the introduction of Megumi's sister. This was a pretty big lingering thing for the Culling Games story, especially Megumi, his character, his growth. It was all for her. So when we finally get to see her, it's actually not as grand as you would originally expect. And the reason why Akutami has done this is because there is more here for her. See, currently, Megumi's sister houses a very old individual. We don't know who this person is, but we know they have a problem with Sukuna, and they want to fight Sukuna. And this puts Megumi in a really weird position. What makes this even more difficult is that Hana and Angel are also seeking Sukuna. You can probably see where this is going. Currently, very powerful individuals are seeking Sukuna to either fight him, or eliminate him, or to try and stop him altogether. But we know deep down that the Culling Games' ulterior motive is something to do with Sukuna. A bath, amalgamation of cursed energy, not only to merge with all of these individuals of Japan to create something, but to also potentially empower and give birth to Sukuna. What leads us into the third and final, the most recent stuff that is just absolutely tearing the community in half and blowing it up exponentially because it's so exciting, is Sukuna. It's actually great how Akutami's approached this, because periodically more and more people are seeking Sukuna and wanting to fight him. So more and more attention is being brought to him, and finally that explosion has gone off. Sukuna has come out to play, and it's the most aggressive version that we have ever seen from him, but he takes over Megumi's body. We don't know the effect of this. We don't know how long this lasts for. Is it permanent? Is it similar to Yuji? Or is it something much more? Because of this, the community is going feral, and I couldn't be more happy for it. This is the ramp up or excitement that I think a lot of people needed from the Culling Games, and finally it is here. But it raises a ton of interesting questions. What is the point? Why take over Megumi? Why do it now? What is Sukuna trying to do? Is he trying to create the perfect vessel? Is Megumi that perfect vessel? Or is it something Megumi can create that is the perfect vessel for Sukuna? And does it have to be within the Culling Games? See, when you start a theory craft, it becomes very difficult because there's not a lot of information we can work with. We know that there was a version of the Culling Games 1,000 years ago which most likely gave birth to Sukuna. How Sukuna was born, however, is very interesting, and with the families involved potentially with Sukuna's birth, taking a human and a curse and a sorcerer potentially, you have an individual that to me is the epitome of cursed energy. Someone that can wield it, someone that can see it, manifest it, feast upon it, and I think it would explain a lot of his abilities and the tenacity that he shows towards it. He is the way he is because he is everything. He is a sorcerer, he is a cursed spirit, but he's also human. However, when it comes to a vessel, Megumi seems like the best carrier or person to create it, especially when you look at his domain, for example, something that is very much incomplete still, but we've seen a massive spinal structure being built. Could you imagine the completion of that? As you can probably tell, there is a ton of ideas and not enough information to really go off, so it's just throwing at anything and everything at this point, but it's fun, it's exciting. Currently the community's in shambles and I can't blame you for it. I think this does kickstart the end of this story and it's not looking very bright and bubbly. Admittedly, it never was going to be that, but we know that a lot of people are going to die. The next handful of weeks are going to be very, very important for Sukuna, his goals, for Megumi and his future, for his sister, and even for Yuji, someone that can be descended upon by many individuals and be obliterated and not be able to heal properly. So what do we do with him? Does he grow? Does he get something of his own? Or maybe he keeps a portion of the powers that he had ingested for so long. If this is one finger of Sukuna within Megumi, what happens to the other 15, 14, 13 that are within Yuji? Do they just disappear as well? His markings are completely gone, or is it just a conscious thing? I'm more than excited to see where Akutami goes from here, and I'm sure a lot of you are too. So I want to know all of your thoughts for everything right now. Thank you.